Good afternoon or good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world as you're watching, and welcome to the first panel in the For Flourishing's Sake virtual book launch extravaganza. I've called it an extravaganza because it's felt like that as I've organised it with all the different panels and all the different panellists, which has been absolutely amazing. And I'm beyond excited to be here with this fantastic panel of educators who you'll meet in a moment, and they'll introduce themselves properly as well. So I'll just introduce myself briefly. I'm Frederika Roberts. I am the author of For Flourishing's Sake. I am a former teacher, and I am now a trainer and speaker in positive education and character education. And this is my absolute passion, particularly whole school positive education. I'm currently doing a doctorate in this and developing further a model that I developed during my master's in applied positive psychology. So really keen to kind of drive forward whole school positive education and support children and staff in schools to flourish. That's what I do. So we'll be with you for the next hour, and we'll be talking about the why, but particularly about the how of positive education, character education, and the whole school picture, how we make that happen. And that's why I've got these amazing people with us today, because when I interviewed them for the book, it gave me such immense joy and hope as well to hear their experiences and their stories of how they've made this happen in their individual settings all over the world, because we've got quite an international panel today from the UK, Australia, Germany, and the US. So it's quite an eclectic mix. And just like as I wanted to bring examples from real life and bring these stories to life on the pages in the book, the purpose of doing these panels, this extravaganza that we've got going, is so that you can hear directly from the educators that contributed to the book, and they can bring their own stories to life for you on your screen today. So it's great that you're here with us, and I'm really honoured to have these amazing people with us. Now, For Flourishing's Sake is published for Kindle today, so if you buy it today, it's there with you straight away. Thanks to the joys of what we're going through at the moment with coronavirus in the world, the publication has been staggered a little bit. So the paperback will come out on the 21st of August. Now that's great, because it means we get another chance to have another one of these amazing panel days as well. So make sure you do get your copy today, and there you go. You can get the details to go to the link and get your copy of the book, and make sure that then you can use those examples and those stories to help you make your environment as conducive to flourishing as possible. Now, before I hand over to Adele and the panel, I just have a few thank yous to say, because this book would never have happened without the contributions of the panellists that are here today, and of course all of the contributors who haven't been able to join us on panels as well, and those who will be on later panels today and on the 21st of August. So a huge thank you to all of you from the bottom of my heart. Also, a massive thank you to Andrew Cowley, the author of the Wellbeing Toolkit, because he wrote a beautiful foreword to this book. So thank you so much, Andrew, for that. And a massive thank you to the wonderful endorsers who agreed to spend a lot of their time to read early pre-publication copies of the book, so that the endorsements could go onto the cover and into the first pages of the book. Thank you so much. I am immensely grateful. I keep saying those words. I can't think of different words to say that, but I'm just absolutely bowled over. And last but not least, a huge virtual hug, until I can give you a hug in person, to the wonderful Adele, my friend Adele, who's agreed to chair this panel today. Adele and I met on Twitter a few years ago, and then we finally met just under 2 years ago, I think it was, Adele, wasn't it? At the what was it called, the Practical Pedagogies Conference in Cologne, in Germany, and we got on so well that we were talking in my hotel lobby until gone 2 o'clock in the morning. I think for the last hour of that we were wearing our coats and ready to go and standing saying we're going to go now, and ever since it's been an absolute pleasure and delight every opportunity I've had to either just talk to Adele on a social level or to work together. So I'm really delighted to have Adele here today hosting this panel. Adele is a behaviour and education specialist with so much experience, so do check out her website, adelebateseducation.co.uk. Fantastic content on how you can support wellbeing through behaviour management as well in schools, but I'm sure she'll introduce herself a bit more as well. So with that, it's time for me to stop talking and to hand over to Adele and to show you the wonderful panel we have here today.
Hello.
Over to you, Adele.
Hello. Okay. Firstly, Fred, thank you for that introduction. That's the second time I've felt teary already today. Have we got an echo going on? Have you got an echo going on there? Are we okay? No. Okay, I'll carry on and hope for the best then. So, as that wonderful introduction from Fred said, I'm a behaviour and education specialist. So I work with pupils with SEMH, social, emotional, mental health issues. I work in schools with them, as well as training other staff to work with those pupils, supporting staff, supporting schools, local authorities. And I have my own book coming out next year that I'm working on that is called Miss I Don't Give a Shit. So I have the delight of welcoming the panel. So first of all, we are going to welcome Rhiannon McGee, who is over in Australia. Hello, Rhiannon.
Hello, Adele. Thanks for having me.
And what time did you say you're on over there?
It's 9:30 in the evening on a Thursday.
Okay. Are you at school tomorrow or online on school tomorrow?
We actually had our last day of teaching today. It's the end of term, so just a couple of meetings tomorrow, so it's all fine.
Good. Well, thank you. So, as you might have guessed, Rhiannon works in a school. She's the head of positive education at Geelong Grammar School, and you shall see her Twitter handle on her screen, which is RHIM McGee. And the question I'm going to ask Rhiannon and all of the panel as I introduce them is just to give us a little bit of a tasty flavour to kick us off. In one sentence, please could you just describe for us what positive education is?
At this point in time, I would define positive education as the skills and practices to support wellbeing, drawing on positive psychology and other disciplines.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And I heard that semicolon in your sentence, making it still one sentence. Very clever. Nice skills there. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Becca Comizio from the USA, who is a school psychologist in New Canaan Country School. Her Twitter handle is Becca Comiz. And hello, Becca. Whereabouts are you now? What time are you on?
Hello, Adele. Thank you for having me. I am in Connecticut, just a little bit south of where my school is in New Canaan, and it is just after 7:30 in the morning.
Okay, thank you. And your one sentence, please, to sum up positive education.
Okay, so this will be a challenge, but one sentence would be that I see positive education, especially in my little neck of the woods, in my school, New Canaan Country School, as a framework from which all other aspects of education arise. So it's looking at the science of positive psychology in order to inform academic programming, character education, nutrition and health, sports, discipline, positive discipline, and really respect. Our mission at New Canaan Country School is to respect childhood, respect the integral nature of childhood and whole children. So positive education is the framework from which everything we do arises.
Thank you. I love your header sentence there. That's great. Cheers. And we are going to get to know a bit more about you and your settings later on. So next we move over to Elke Paul, who is in Germany, I believe. I don't know whereabouts. We'll find that out. She is a positive education consultant, a professional development expert, a wellbeing conference organizer with IPEN, and her Twitter handle is Elke Pos Ed. Hello, Elke.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. So please start off. Tell us whereabouts exactly you are in Germany and what time you're on.
I think it's roughly 1:30, 1:40 it is in Berlin in the afternoon, and I'm sitting in Berlin, close to the center.
Yeah, thank you. And do you have one sentence that you can describe positive education in?
So the definition that I use often, because it's a quick one, is positive education trains well-being and human values, so we can establish a better relationship with ourselves, with the people around us, and with the world we live in. That's how I would describe.
Gorgeous, thank you. There's some tweetables here. I suppose watch Marie Forleo. She always has tweetables. These are real tweetables. Okay, and thank you, Elke. Let's move on finally to Fabian de Fabiani, and I believe you are in the UK.
Yeah, morning everyone.
Whereabouts are you?
Afternoon. I'm in South London, so I'm actually in school. I'm in school today, so Townley Grammar School in Bexley Heath. I'm in my office. I don't usually have a big red door behind me at home. So this is
thank you. Yeah. Okay. So Fabian is the assistant head teacher at Townley Grammar School and director of character, Odyssey Trust for Education, policy advisor for Ofsted, and keynote speaker. And his Twitter feed is FDE Fab, which is on the screen there. So thank you, Fabian. Thank you for being your office, Fabian. That's great. Love that. Okay, do you have a sentence you can sum up positive education with?
Yes, I think positive education really is simply developing and embedding a sense of purpose and optimism amongst young people. That's how we've approached it at Townley, and that's kind of been my own practice and how I've tried to approach it. So it's inspiring and developing a sense of purpose and optimism within the school systems.
Thank you. Okay, and Frederika, obviously you've already introduced yourself, but I would like to hear your sentence, please, lady.
I thought I was going to get away with that there. I think positive education, I'm going to go with the IPEN definition because I like the IPEN definition. It's the combination of educating for well-being and character as well as educating for academic achievement. So it's not that we're talking about just doing well-being to the expense of all else. It's actually about doing the two together, and that when you actually do look after well-being and character, then it supports the academic achievement and development as well of the children. And within that, it's a very long sentence, I would say that it's about the whole school. It's not just about doing well-being lessons or anything like that. It's actually about making sure that the school supports that.
Lovely, thank you. So I am going to, just to make everyone at home really jealous, I'm going to show my paper copy. As contributors we've already got, go get it. But you can see I've started my reading of it, and the start of this book really gives us a good overview, firstly, of what positive education is, and secondly, it starts looking at this difference between positive education and character education, which I know are often kind of bandied around as if they're the same thing, or aren't they, or which way is this? So I just want to clear this up right at the start so we really know what we're talking about. So Frederika, would you want to kick off with that anyway, just to define those differences for us?
Okay, yeah. So the way I see it might not be the way everybody sees it, and it'll be really interesting actually to hear from the other panelists in terms of their views on the differences and similarities. I think there is a lot of overlap. If you look at a lot of stuff that's been said about and written about by academics and by educators about what positive education aims to achieve and what character education aims to achieve, there's a lot of overlap that the word flourishing is used a lot, hence the name of the book, For Flourishing's Sake, because that term is used in both fields, really. The way I look at it, character is actually a massive element of positive psychology, looking at character strengths and how they underpin our psychological well-being. And so I kind of see character education as being a big, massive element of the whole positive education picture. Positive education including other stuff like the policies, procedures, the staff well-being, the interventions, the ethos of a school, all of that kind of thing. But having said that, there's also, I think, differences in countries and cultures and how we actually use those terms. And in the UK, for example, not many people actually would use positive education, but they would use character education. They talk a lot about a lot of the stuff that I mentioned when I talk about positive education. So it's a bit fluid, I would say, from my perspective.
Thank you, Frederika. So I want to pick on that point that you've said about us. I think we have got some echoes going on, haven't we? Thank you, Rebecca, just for pointing that out. I don't know whether we can just mute if we're not speaking. Thank you. So just pick up on your point, Frederika, about the fact that actually it is different culturally and in different countries. So I'm going to switch over to Australia and see if we've got a comparison there. So in terms of the difference or the similarities between positive and character education, how does that work over where you are, Rhiannon?
Yeah, probably in Australia, the terminology character education isn't used as much as I've noticed in America, England, and other places. I think the well-being, the movement in Australia has really risen out of an ongoing movement around well-being in Australia, and positive education and the application of positive psychology in educational settings as an evolution of that. And certainly, you know, 10 or 11 years down the track here, our thinking continues to evolve, whereby we have felt that one of the challenges with positive psychology in the first iteration, perhaps, of positive education is that it has been a little bit individualistic, my well-being, and so on. And there are elements of POSED, obviously, which draw on character strengths, which draw on meaning, purpose, and making a contribution to the world. So our feeling is that as we've evolved, there's been more of an emphasis on the we, not me, and I think that's reflected in the field more broadly, in the field of POS-Psych more broadly, just a maturation. So I suppose my understanding of character is more about evolving into individuals who are going to make a positive contribution in the world, and I think that has been a little bit beyond what the initial intentions of positive education were in Australia, which really was to support the well-being of individuals and communities. And obviously we know that pro-social component is integral, but it perhaps wasn't as explicit. So I think the challenges sometimes with positive education is that there is a lot of overlap with a lot of different approaches and disciplines, and I think it is really important that we do, you know, clearly define what we mean by POSED. And I think it's great that we started this panel by doing that.
Rhiannon, I'm just going to pause you slightly because I think your connection is a little bit slow. But I think we've got the main bit of your answer there. So I'm just hoping perhaps later on that will come back.
Okay.
But yeah, so just because it's kind of slightly challenging to hear your point just now, but we can come back to that in a bit. But thank you. And moving over to Elke in Germany, could you talk us through the differences or similarities of character education and positive education where you are?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I have to say, in Germany, positive education or well-being is still very early in its early stages. I almost think it's sort of a pioneer state. It would be more defined as mental health education. And when I talk about character education in my workshops, I talk a lot about human values, or values that make us human in comparison, for example, to artificial intelligence, which is now moving more and more into education. So I emphasize on that. What is it that we need a teacher for in the future, for example, if we can get all the information online, and if we can get even good ways and explainer videos and everything to be academically educated, could we then actually spare the teacher? So that's a very valid question to ask. And then if you ask that, it comes quite quickly back, no, there's a lot of human stuff that we need teachers to teach kids, and kids need to teach kids together. And I think that's where positive education is at the moment getting broader, and looking more into two more aspects. I think it's one of them would be change management, which I get quite often consulted about, and the other one is future skills. So for me, character education is involving these two components as well.
Thank you, Elke. And just for my own edification, could you please give us a translation of the words in German?
Charakterbildung und the funny one, positive education. I tried whether I should actually translate that into German, and that would be positive Bildung. And I never could get really around it. So what I did in the end is I kept it. So I'm working with the German Association of Positive Psychology, and we kept it as positive education in English, even in Germany.
Because I find that very fascinating as a concept or an approach travels the seas. When you find the countries who don't have their own words for it, I think that often then you can see that in practice sometimes. And you're saying that you are in the early stages still in Germany.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely, I agree.
And then over to the US. So whereabouts do you find this at the moment?
Yeah, so over here, we also talk much more often about character education. And I think in schools around the US, especially in the Northeast where I am, we talk a lot about social emotional learning. And I do think the concepts of character education have shifted into social emotional learning. So we talk a lot about, we use the Collaborative for Academic Social Emotional Learning has some beautiful research and support for their social emotional competencies, which include self-awareness, self-management, pro-social skills, decision-making skills. And so that's how we think about character education in terms of supporting kids to grow in those social emotional competencies for the goals of well-being.
Thank you very much. And I think just what you're saying then about the social emotional side of it. So for myself, I work a lot in special schools with children specifically and young people who have social emotional mental health issues. And from a lot of the schools that I've worked in the UK, I would say that underpinning a lot of what we're doing is positive education, is character education, is a mixture, but it's not necessarily in our vocab. But I would say in special schools, we have to, because of the nature of the young people that we work with. So that's interesting that social emotional comes back when we get to the US. Okay, so moving on, I really want to hear some more stories and some more examples of these things, these approaches working in practice. So I'd like to move over to Fabian and ask you, okay, so how has positive education worked out in your school or in your classroom? How does that work?
Okay, that's a really good question, and it is really important because I think, especially in the UK, character education, positive education, well-being is talked about more now. So it's kind of entered, especially in secondary schools. I'm an assistant ed in a secondary school and the director of character and well-being for our trust, the Odyssey Trust. But actually, within secondary schools now, there's a greater awareness of character education. But what have we actually done tangibly? And I guess our journey really began about 4.5, 5 years ago. So I've been at Townley for 6 years now. And really it starts with your values. And I think what a school needs to establish really clearly and from the outset are what are the school values and what is the purpose of the education. Now, character education, I think, is really about empowering students to realize avenues, potentials that maybe they hadn't really been exposed to previously. But alongside that, there needs to be, as you've all identified, a clear sense of well-being and a clear set of well-being principles. Because you cannot build character unless you have a positive and a happy individual. So what we've done at Townley and across the trust is really, we started off looking at how the house system could develop extracurricular opportunities. So it started off with elements of extracurricular in terms of yoga, in terms of meditation, public speaking, and now what we've really developed is curriculum. I think it's fundamental that within each area, whether it is English or maths or science, there are opportunities where the school values that are established initially are referred to explicitly with the language, but then students can see the tangible outcome. So, for example, one of our key values is social conscience and helping students develop a social conscience. And I think what's been really interesting is seeing how different faculty areas, different department areas look at facilitating opportunities within the curriculum for students to develop a social conscience. So, for example, within humanities, perhaps there's a clearer link there. We look at protest movements in history. We've looked at, within English, kind of decolonizing curricula and looking at how students can understand the past and in a better way develop a greater understanding of how the world works, but then they can see how their subject areas will help them facilitate that development in the future. So whether it's through careers or whether it's just an understanding that what they're learning isn't purely for learning's sake, it isn't just to get through the exam. And I think that's something we're really proud of and something we've developed substantially, but it's taken time. It isn't a case of, just kind of ticking a box and doing it over one term or two. It's at least a 3-year plan, and getting students to see that what they're learning isn't purely for the exam basis. There's a greater purpose for it. And we've developed over the last year a curriculum called 21C, which is knowledge rich, but at the same time helping students understand that they should want to learn and are given opportunities, not just to write down things and to take their exams, but to debate, to discuss, to have symposia, to have active learning and active opportunities to discuss what they're learning. So I mean, there's a whole range of extracurricular, but really importantly, it's about the choices you make and given sufficient time within the curriculum to dedicate it towards character and positive education, but also training staff, and that's fundamental. And I know we're going to talk about the training of staff and students in this field.
Can I just ask you a question?
Yeah.
Just before we go into the training itself, is that you're talking here really about giving the pupils a chance to understand that it's not just about exams, it's about learning, etc. Now, my experience of particularly the UK education system is it's not always just the pupils you have to persuade, but it could be other teachers, it could be governors, it could be local authorities, it could be academy trusts. So just going a step back, how did you discuss that kind of culture change at that level?
So it's a really good question. Fundamentally, I've been very fortunate. I'm on SLT now, but I wasn't 4 or 5 years ago. It's only been a year to have kind of support from senior leadership. And really, that's why the values are so important, because when you have a clear set of school values that say that learning is incredibly important and it isn't a matter of being an exam factory, then actually having those discussions with senior leaders, with governors, with staff, they kind of lend themselves naturally. But it takes time, because what we found is actually when you talk to parents and you talk to governors about the importance of having a whole school approach, developing the whole student and not just one small element of them, which is the exam part. Actually, what we found is governors, parents are incredibly open to that. Within staff, because the UK system historically and still is, I'm not getting into the politics of it or the right or wrong, is still an exam-based system. Actually, with staff, it's been slightly kind of a longer journey than, say, with governors and with parents, because our whole training from PGCE or schools direct or from 30, 40 years onwards to today is, we are functioning within the realpolitik of an exam-based system. So that's kind of been a longer process. But then when you can empower staff and say that within the curriculum, it's not just about the exams, you can it's important that you are nurturing this love of learning and giving staff the opportunity and the confidence, particularly at Key Stage 3, because at Key Stage 3, there are no, external exams. It's a real opportunity. Staff love that, and they feel empowered, and they've responded really positively. So it has been sorry.
Fabian, just for our international audience, Key Stage 3 is 11-year-olds to...
Yeah, 11 to 14. 11 to 14.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Fabian. I think what I'm really hearing there is the importance of embedding this as well, and that's how it works essentially. Rebecca, can I go over to you and ask you a similar question about how have you seen positive education work? How have you embedded it within your school environment?
Well, one way that it's I think really important, especially right now, is to look at systems such as disciplinary systems and systems of referring kids to special supports and help, because what we're noticing is lots of inequities in our school systems. And so applying a framework like positive behavior intervention and support, which is its own area, but of like Fabian had said earlier, teaching children explicit character goals or school values that by creating explicit understandings of what we know children are capable of achieving and what we'd like to see in our communities, in our school communities, we are better able to set children up for success. And then when things go wrong, looking at behavior as communication and supporting children without sort of a really sharp punitive edge. We see over and over again that, for example, suspensions and detentions and things like that really may address symptoms of behavior problems in schools, but that don't teach children what to do and don't really solve the problem. So that's one way in which positive education in the form of systems change is starting to really impact schools. And I think there's right now in this country specifically, all of us are really thinking very deeply about social justice and inequities and affording all children the opportunities to learn and grow and achieve. So that's definitely one way. I think also there really is a strong emphasis on social emotional learning as an important area of education in itself, apart from the traditional academic subjects, but woven into the traditional academic subjects. We see that schools that have strong evidence-based SEL programs have better outcomes for kids, fewer disciplinary referrals, better GPAs often, and positive school culture is another thing that we really can look at and measure. And I think the measurement of all this, too, in my field in school psychology, is really important. That as we're implementing, whether it's social emotional learning programs or PBIS, positive behavior interventions and support programs, we need to make sure that things are going well, or at least we need to know when they're not. So by being very careful with measurement and progress monitoring, so that we can tweak programs as we go, is another really important part of it.
Thank you, Rebecca. Could you just let us know what GPA stands for?
Oh, sorry, grade point average.
Yep. Okay, cool.
That schools think a lot about helping kids be academically successful.
Yes. So what I'm really hearing just from the few months we've had so far is that in order for this to be successful, in order for this to really support our young people, both emotionally and academically, we're looking for a real focus on values and embedding these approaches within the system. Rhiannon, I'm going to move over to you in a second and ask the same question, how you've implemented this. But just a quick reminder to the people who are watching, we do have a hashtag, Flourishing Ed. If you are over on Twitter right now, then please do that hashtag, especially if you've got any questions for our panel and you'd like to ask live. Okay, over to you, Rhiannon. How have you embedded the positive education approach within your school? How have you done this?
So I've been in two different contexts. Leading the first context was an all-girls Catholic school where I helped lead the implementation of the whole school approach. And then I've come to Geelong Grammar when they were about 10 years into their journey, and my focus has been quite different. It's about how you sustain positive education and how you continue to evolve. So what's worked in the first context doesn't necessarily work in the second context. And certainly whilst in my previous school I was able to see the evidence of positive education coming to life in the language and the culture of the school, it was already evident when I came to grammar, and our model emphasises learning, living, teaching and embedding positive education, and that speaks to a lot of what my colleagues have referred to this evening. And there is a strong emphasis on teacher training, and every staff member at our school who commences their journey at Geelong Grammar School engaged in a 3-day positive education course. So a very strong emphasis from top down, I suppose, in the school on the importance of that learning piece. And then, of course, we have a positive education subject, which we say provides the opportunity to teach the skills and practices of wellbeing explicitly. But then, of course, we have the implicit piece, as many others have referred to, where the emphasis is on incorporating the language of positive education in a broader school environment, and then embedding through policies and practices, and ensuring that that message is consistent. And 11 or so years on for us, you know, we are at a point of change in our school. Like in every school, you need to continue to grow and evolve and keep your ear to the ground. And what positive education looks like in a year, 2 years or 3 years time for us will probably be quite different, because, you know, schools are dynamic places and we just have to make sure that we're doing everything we can to engage our community. So that learning, teaching, piece is really important, but now I'm really emphasising integrating. So do we need to call it positive education anymore? Is it time to really reintegrate into the broader educational picture? And that's where we're at the moment.
Great, thank you. You said that you have a specific lesson at the moment on positive education. Out of interest, I don't know much about the education system in Australia. How does that fit within any national curriculum that's set? How does that work?
So the Australian national curriculum does have what we call social and emotional competencies, drawing on a classical framework and social emotional learning. We have some positive psychology elements in our health curriculum, but there's no positive education subject in our national curriculum per se. The schools in Australia, like my own, who have taken positive education, many have chosen to create a subject. In our school, we teach positive education from early learning until year 10, and then in year 11 and 12, the last 2 years of school, there isn't so much room in the timetable, so POS Ed is integrated into the broader life of the school and what we might call pastoral care. So our students from early learning to year 10 have exposure to POS Ed for about an hour a week at least at the moment.
Okay, thank you. And could you just let us know as well, what age is year 10 for you in Australia?
About 15. 15,
so
16,
they have it until then, and then it's kind of more embedded in other stuff in those later years. Okay, thank you. And I think what you said there really echoes. I did an education research trip last year in Finland, and they very much have that approach over there of that they're constantly developing, and their education has to be something that's constantly evolving. They're very, very forward thinking in that way, and that seemed to echo some of the things that you were saying about positive education might not be called positive education because it might have developed into something else, and that feels very similar to what I experienced in Finland as well last year. So moving over to Elke, I'd like to ask you, I know specifically you are interested in looking at, when embedding positive education, the role of teachers first before actually we get to the pupils. Would you be able to tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, I think the in-depth experience I had with that, I was a consultant, an in-house consultant for 2 years at an international school here in Berlin. And I was given the great freedom to actually teach or workshop the entire staff of the school, which was first very disruptive for the school because teachers had to be, or staff members had to be taken out of classes to be with me for 3 days. And so we staggered that throughout the year. But what I found, and we had actually an external evaluator looking at that, what I found was that it created a social bond that the school didn't have before, because we had staff members and teachers coming from different areas of the school together. We created a very diverse mix. So let's say a gardener would speak to the primary principal and workshop with that person for 3 days. And what that created was a plateau or a POS Ed understanding or well-being understanding, a language that they all could share. And that actually created a vessel then to say, now we know what we are talking about if we're talking about well-being. So how can we make this ours? And I think Fabian has talked about that a couple of times, saying, you know, it needs to be integrated into the values of each school. And I totally agree. But for me, it's very, very important to make the teacher the central, or the staff members, the central agents of that process. And I support strongly, for example, appreciative inquiry processes, where you actually become the driver and change agent at a very democratic level, so that we then create together a strength-based approach of how education can actually look in our school. And that for me is the biggest game changer that I noticed so far, and that inspired me to actually work more on the topic of how to engage teachers onto that journey.
Thank you. Fred, I would like to move over to you, maybe just to ask a similar question about anything different that you've seen in terms of embedding positive education, but also as a second part to your question. I'm sitting here, I work in a school, I'm a head, I'm a local authority, I'm getting interested, and of course my next question is the cost, and I wonder whether you could address that one for us as well.
Okay, so what was the first part of the question again? Sorry.
No, that's okay. So just looking at this, how have you seen, because I know you work in lots of different schools and you work internationally as well. Are there any other things that you've seen as how-tos that people can embed positive education within their education environments?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I see, of course, being an external consultant that goes in and delivers training, is that a number of schools that really embrace positive and character education are bringing in people like me to either deliver training to the children directly. So a bit like, you know, at Geelong and how Rhiannon was saying about actually giving lessons on positive psychology, but what some schools are doing is, rather than having it built into the curriculum, they're bringing people in externally to deliver some of that training, and also deliver training with staff as well. So whether that's done in-house as it is at Geelong, or whether it's done, you know, and as it was at Elke's former school as well, or whether it's done through external consultants that just come in from time to time. The other thing that I've seen that's been a really interesting development in the UK in the last sort of 18 months or so is I've started working with a number of academy trusts. So for those who are not in the UK, an academy trust in the UK is basically state funded but independently run for the most part, and it tends to be quite often a number of schools that get together under a trust with a common purpose and overall leadership. And I've started working with a number of these academy trusts on bringing action research into schools. So really empowering the staff and as part of that, overcoming the objections, you know, to actually give the staff the control over, let's try things out, but try them out in a methodical way, in a research-driven way. So they're actually getting some training from me into what character education and positive education is, and some of the interventions that they can look at as well, but also the bigger picture. And then they try things out within their own setting, and they document that as well. And I think that's a really interesting development, and I'd like to see a lot more of that, of that research happening directly in schools, because a lot of what's been happening in terms of the development of this from a research perspective has come out of academia. And if you take it from academia and then say to schools, here you go, here's something we've researched, and it worked brilliantly in that school when we did it under controlled conditions, but you know, we now want you to put that into your school. The ideal way to do that is for those schools to go, well, that sounds really great, let's try this out on a small scale in our setting and see how it works and whether we can tweak it and what might work in our setting. And I think that's a really exciting part of that. And what was the second part of the question?
Sorry. So the second part was...
It's me.
The second part was, okay, I'm sitting here, I'm interested, I'm excited, I can see the positivities in this, haha, pun intended. What are the costs?
The costs, well, that's an interesting one, because it's actually one that probably some of our panelists might be better off answering. And I think Fabian, particularly out of this panel, talked about it a bit in the book, so I might defer that one to him in a minute. It's interesting because I think on one hand, we have seen that the development of positive education and a lot of the work does seem to be disproportionately happening in high-end exclusive independent schools, and that can be a concern, and it's certainly a concern I think for all of us, regardless of what setting we work in, that we want to see it in more schools and in all settings. And what I tried to do with the book is to actually show that all sorts of schools, even schools with tiny budgets, can actually make this happen. And I think schools that really value bringing flourishing to the forefront of what they're doing in this kind of context are finding creative ways of making it happen without it having to cost the earth. And that's where maybe I'll defer to Fabian in a moment. But what I've also seen is that a number of people, and one of them being Dan Morrow, who is the CEO of the Woodland Academy Trust, who will be on the panel on the 21st of August. And also the other one that springs to mind that's made similar points was Patrick Otley O'Connor, who's an executive head teacher that goes into different schools when they need particular support, and is also a coach to many head teachers in this country. That they've actually given examples in the book of ways that by bringing in positive education, they've actually saved an awful lot of money. And it comes down to a lot of that being the staff well-being issue that we suffer all over the world from massive staff attrition due to the terrible well-being of staff in education. And that actually when you bring in positive education practices and you make them systemic and you make sure that staff are well, then you retain your staff and you save massive amounts of money in terms of those recruitment and training costs of bringing in new staff. So actually, although there might be a cost initially, it's more than recouped that way. But I know, Fabian, you're in a school that's a state-funded school. It's part of an academy trust, and I know that you've talked quite a bit in my book about that. So if I may, Adele, can I hand that over to Fabian if he wants to add something? Oh.
You're muted, Fabian.
So I think in terms of costs, it fundamentally comes down to choices and what is the school willing to spend the money on. Now, obviously, we're a state-funded school. We have budgets that we need to stick to and so on. I think it's a bit of a false narrative to say that this will cost X amount of money for schools to say we can't do it for costs. And I think that is sometimes an excuse on different head teachers' parts, different schools, and also for teachers to say, oh, we don't have the time. Sometimes there's the cost analysis, then the time analysis, and some people say we don't have time to do this. As Frederika was saying, in terms of the staff training and well-being, I think if you spend X amount of money on staff well-being, actually you will see that then staff retention improves, enhances. I mean, within our school, our staff retention has really improved. There was never an issue, but we've seen kind of marginal gains there. Well-being as well in terms of the health and well-being of staff. So I think you recoup costs that way, but it is down to choices. And CPD learning more isn't. There's always a slight cost to that, but I think especially now that character education is on the Ofsted framework, there could be a risk that there will be, really kind of new organizations coming out there saying, we're going to be able to help you develop character education with one CPD session, and we'll give you this tool. Now, that's not going to work. I think the really great thing about the work Frederika's been doing, and actually the history between Fred's and kind of our school, is that actually we've we've come together at different CPD events, and we've shared best practice. And I think if, we can create more of a learning community based on positive education and character education, then there's kind of a greater element of knowing the individual, the organization, trusting, and then saying, yeah, actually that cost will be well spent. I think within the state sector in schools, there's a tendency for head teachers and CEOs, unfortunately in different kind of areas, to want a quick fix and to think they'll buy in X month. That's not the approach to have. If you're committing to developing positive education and character education, it's at least a 2 to 3 year plan, and it isn't anyone offering you a quick fix isn't really the real deal. And I might kind of be speaking a bit too outspoken with that, but I think it's important. It's important that you generate kind of a greater sense of trust, and you look into people's credentials, and you realise that actually, when it comes to school, it's down to a choice. There are always going to be costs with everything, and it's what you value as a school and what you really do, nurturing. Fred's done such wonderful work in so many different schools, and with kind of a long-term rapport there and a long-term education relationship. It's not just a case of kind of super people coming in and transforming it with one CPD. There needs to be a kind of a long-term plan there. And yeah,
Thank you, Fabian. Thank you. So I really like Fabian's given us a really good tip there. Look out for the people who are going to go, oh, here's a CPD and let's do it in one afternoon. And that's really not how positive education works. And I am going to swiftly move on to the last question because I want to finish on time. But Rebecca has just given us a note here saying schools should ask themselves about the cost not to do this work, which I think is a wonderful way of looking at it. So thank you, Rebecca. So moving on to the final question. I think it would be silly of us not to be talking about all these wonderful benefits of positive education and not putting it in the very real here and now situation that we're in. So I'm talking about COVID, I'm talking about lockdown, I'm talking about the massive movement for Black Lives Matter. And I'm going to open this up to the floor. And bearing in mind, if you could keep your answers down to just a minute or so that we do finish on time. But how do you see positive education being useful or positive when such ginormous things are happening in the world and with our pupils and our teachers and everyone within the school community? Is there someone who would like to kick us off with that? I can't see anyone. Rebecca, lovely, thank you.
Yes, thank you. I think that even prior to the pandemic, we saw the rise of mental health challenges among our young people all over the world. And I know in the United States that for the first time ever, adolescents reported feeling more stress than their parents. And that's so on us as adults. And I think, the situation with shelter in place and remote learning and all of the horrible news lately about in police brutality in the United States has just exacerbated existing mental health vulnerabilities. And so I think that, had we been doing more of this work all along, we would be in a better place to, as I said before, address some of the inequities. So that I know that wasn't short and I could probably go on, but I will hand it off to someone else.
Is there anyone else who wants to pick up on Rebecca's points? Yeah, Fabian?
Sorry, just briefly. Yeah, I think with COVID and also with the murder of George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, I think especially within UK schools, we're thinking of the recovery curriculum. And I think positive education, in particular in terms of well-being and trauma, is really at the forefront now in terms of forming that recovery curriculum and trying to heal some of that trauma. And just to reiterate that, if you think about governments and so on, with all these lockdowns, what's actually been important to note is that when the question was between health and wealth, the lockdowns came in the majority of the world's governments, and we valued health and well-being above GDP. And I think that can only kind of encourage us and reaffirm what we're doing.
Lovely, thank you, Fabian. And so as we bow out, as we start to wrap up, I would just like the panelists to think if there's any final thoughts or any pieces about positive education that you feel you didn't get off your chest, especially how-tos. I think it's been really useful in this panel today, listening to people explain how they've invited this work into their different scenarios. And I can also reiterate as well, because I've read some of the book, that Fred's really good at doing this. She does really give us lots of examples of this is how it works in a very small setting with a very, very small budget, and then to the opposite as well in different settings, but it is all in the book, so I do recommend that. So going to final thoughts from the panel. Rhiannon, are you okay to start?
Sure. I think that this experience this evening for me has just reminded me about the value of connecting with other schools who are on the journey, both in your own country and beyond. And anytime I've had the opportunity to do that, especially when you are a leader in your own school. Sometimes it can feel a bit lonely if you're at the early stages. I think it's just really helpful to learn from each other, to keep an open mind, and to know that we haven't got, we're endeavouring to do the best we can by our young people, but there's still a lot of work we need to do around measurement. So we need to help each other out in that way too, to make sure that we are definitely doing the best we can by our kids.
Yeah, thank you, Rhiannon.
I would like to add on to that. I think it's important to encourage our teachers who often feel left alone and say that the leadership is not really looking after their well-being, and the numbers are equally dire for teacher well-being as they are for kids' well-being. So I do think we should all have the alarm bells ringing, and I do encourage teachers to really seek out these information about positive education. And even if you're the only one in your school, you can do it for your own sake first, because if you help yourself first, that to be at a more balanced place, that is already a huge help to all the students you work with. And again, I agree that we should really network much better together, so to create a bigger and better movement, and we should get louder. That's what I really think. We need to get louder and get out of the niche market. And the last thing I would say is keep going and be very self-critical about it.
Lovely, thank you, Elke. And I must say, just echoing from that if people want to get involved in the community of talking about this, Frederika also has a podcast. Is that right, Fred? And you introduce lots of different people.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, it's called the For Flourishing Sake podcast as well. So yeah, and I'm always looking for more contributors. A few of the book's contributors have already participated in there, but it's a great platform to share our learning as educators. Yeah,
thank you. Who else do we want our final thoughts from? I can't see my screen again. Please, could we have the all screen thing? Thank you. Okay, so Rebecca, what are your final thoughts?
Sure. I think that it's so important to consider the adults, and I completely agree. And I think that in terms of well-being, and a related concept is resilience, and we know a little bit about what can help, having connections, having effect. This word is really difficult for me all the time. Efficacy. So for teachers feeling like they are successful at their role, that they have what they need in order to be effective teachers. That's something we can measure and support teachers with. We can measure burnout. We can measure lots of things that can support teacher well-being. And maybe if we can start there in this crucial moment for us, we're thinking about re-entry, and we want to make sure that the adults are well in order that they can support the students to be well when we get back together in late August or September.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca, which is really echoing what Elke said, the importance of us helping ourselves first. And I loved what you said, Elke, about us. Even if it's only you that you can help in your school to start with, nobody's on board, you can still start with this work and this approach, which I think is what the panel's echoing. Fabian, have you got any final thoughts before we pass back to Frederika?
Yeah, just really quickly echoing what everyone has said, and in particular if you're in a school setting where kind of character and positive education isn't on the kind of agenda, but you do really want to develop it, just kind of have that resilience and have that creativity just to keep kind of pushing for it, because, sooner or later what is universal now in UK schools, but kind of this element of particularly the combination of well-being and character positive education. I think that is really where the future is in education. So just keep banging that drum and start with buying this book.
Lovely, thank you, Fabian. So thank you very much to all our panel. And talking of banging drums, I think we better pass back over to our author of the hour, Frederika Roberts.
Thank you so much, Adele, and thank you so much for that brilliant chairing of a discussion that I'm sure we could have actually gone on for hours because we're all so passionate about the topic. But the hour is up, and I need to at some point go and have some lunch, and Rhiannon needs to go and get some sleep, and Becca needs to get to school, etc. And Fabian probably needs to get back to lessons. But I just wanted to really bring my own final thoughts to this, which is there's so much to unpack, and there's so much going on in the world at the moment. And you're right to have asked that as a final question. You know, what do we do in terms of everything that's happening with Black Lives Matter, with COVID, etc., and the big picture with positive education and how that fits. And a lot has already been said by the other panelists on this, but the one thing that I would like to add to that is that from the very beginning, even though it was perhaps not initially articulated quite so well, but it's certainly been articulated since in the positive psychology movement, and then within positive education, and certainly within character education and everything that's written and talked about there, there's something very crucial there, which Fabian talked about earlier on, which is about sort of the citizenship aspects of that. And positive education and well-being is never just about the individual. It's about societal well-being, societal flourishing, and civic duties, and being responsible, decent human beings and citizens. And so more than ever, this stuff is absolutely crucial, because if we look at what's happening even just with COVID, you know, we are relying on being responsible citizens in terms of respecting lockdown, in terms of not just thinking about whether we might be personally affected, but, you know, the example of the wearing masks, for example, that actually does nothing for you, but people wear masks in various countries to protect other people in case they're asymptomatic as they're walking into shops and into public transport, etc. And if we're looking at the horrible picture that we've been seeing in terms of what's been happening, that's led, thank goodness, to the big resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and the demonstrations all over the world, despite the lockdown situations, is that actually that idea that we can educate children to be citizens that care and that want to actually develop the well-being of those around them is really crucial. So I think there's more need for what we are all doing and talking about than ever. So we will be back with a different panel today to talk about some of the same topics, some different topics, all around positive education and character education later on today. So at 5 p.m. UK time, I'll be back with Flora Barton, Kelly Hannigan, Patrick Otley O'Connor and Rebecca Teague. So that will be a mostly UK-based panel, but absolutely fantastic panelists with different settings, different experiences to really bring this discussion to life again and bring the how to life. And then at 7 o'clock, we're back with an international panel again. So again, 7 o'clock UK time, BST, we're on at the moment. We'll have Serdar Ferit. I'll have to check with him whether I'm pronouncing his name right. Probably not. Ian Flintoff, Julie Goldstein and Katrina Mankani. So we'll have panelists from UK, Finland, the USA again, Connecticut, and also from Dubai. So if you can't join us live for any of those, depending what time it is in the world where you are, then all of the panels, including this one, so you can share the link and share it with other people that couldn't watch it that you think might find it interesting. All the panels will be on the forflourishingsake.com website on the landing page where all the information was about the panels for the day, and also on YouTube and Facebook where you've been watching live and potentially being able to ask questions as well. And of course, remember to buy your copy. It's there at the bottom of For Flourishing's Sake. If you get the Kindle version, which is out today, then you've got it straight away and you can read so much more about the how as well. And once you've read it, I would like to ask you a really big favor, because there are so many books out there, and without reviews, it's very difficult for the books to get seen. So once you've read it, and even if you didn't like all of it, you know, it's not all about 5-star reviews. I mean, I hope you will love it, but it's about honest reviews. So once you've read it, leave me an honest review on Amazon, please. And then as a little thank you, if you let me know about that, and I will be posting on LinkedIn, on the Facebook page and on Twitter, how to let me know about it. So watch out for those posts. It's basically about tagging me and the publisher and using the Flourishing Ed hashtag, and then messaging me so I know how to get in touch with you. So if you share your review publicly and then let me know about it, then I will send you, as a thank you, 5 activities that you can do for your own well-being despite lockdown and despite social distancing. So stuff you can do for yourself right now. and my worksheet, which is 7 wellbeing activities for 7 days, which is aimed at children in Key Stage 2, as we would have it in the UK. So you're looking at sort of 8 to 11-year-olds. And as a really extra thank you, everybody who does that will be put into a draw next month, and one winner will get a 30-minute wellbeing workshop. Now, I know it's not a one cure-all in 30 minutes, but it's just a little taster of some of the stuff that you can do. So a 30-minute wellbeing workshop virtually, given the current situation, but that means I can do that anywhere in the world, for teachers or any staff, for children or for parents at your school, or if you're not based in a school yourself but you want to nominate a school, then you can do that as well. So please get those reviews coming in. They're really, really valuable. So thank you very much. And all that remains for me to say, I'll bring the panel back as I do this, is a huge, huge thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think I'll go and have a little happy cry before I go to the next panel this afternoon. Thank you so, so much to all of you. Thank you, Elke. I'll go down the screen as I see you, Elke, and thank you very much, Becca and Rhiannon and Fabian, for the fantastic input, not just into the panel, but into the book as well, and for giving your time so, so generously to share your experience and your knowledge. And a massive thank you to Adele for chairing this panel today on what I know is a massively busy day for you. So thank you so, so much. You've done a fantastic job. And thank you to all of you for watching as well. And I've seen lots of tweets, and Annie Poole particularly, who will be on a later panel with us as well as contributors. She's been tweeting like mad. So look out on Twitter for all the at Flourishing Ed hashtags and share what she's been sharing. She's been finding all those tweetables you were mentioning, Adele, and tweeting them out. So thank you very much. And thank you to everybody who's been watching. Join us at 5 o'clock UK time and at 7 o'clock UK time if you can. But for now, bye-bye from all of us.
Bye.